When you're ready, I think we're ready.
Okay. Flip the slide. We'll kick things off. George, are you driving? Molly, you driving?
I guess
slide?
I'm driving. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to Informative Friday. Before we get started, I'll pass things over to George and Geri. Just quickly, some background on Bales for those of you who may not be familiar with Bales. We were founded way back in 1995 by Jamie Bales and been a member of the Infor Boston partner community ever since. As you may or may not know, we're a full service Infor partner, provide human capital management, cloud suite, financial supply chain, technology, consulting, and so forth. So we've, like you may know, we've got some very deep roots with Lawson and Infor as far as implementations are concerned. The most important thing, however, about Bales, I believe, is the fact that we are a subsidiary of Nordic Consulting. For those of you who are not familiar with Nordic is a global healthcare consulting company, and they acquired Bales, I guess, about a year and a half ago. The real significance of that for us as an organization and you as our customers, we now have the ability to provide clinical consulting, EMR, EHR, particularly to healthcare organizations with some core competencies with Epic and Meditech and Cerner. So that allows us to look at not only the ERP side of the house, but also the EMR side of the house and offering a full breadth of healthcare consulting services allow you to integrate your ERP with your EMR systems. Some of the other things that we do at Nordic, we've got an advisory services organization that does performance improvement analysis and consulting, and as well as a digital health organization that provides cloud and digital transformation initiative type consulting. So please keep that in mind. We're more than just an Infor ERP consulting provider today. We've got some wide breadth of capabilities in the healthcare space. So with that said, the quick commercial for Nordic and Bales, I'll turn things over to George.
All right. Thank you, Tom. That was great. Over to the next slide. I will throw out a little disclaimer. Let everybody sort of read on that while I'm introducing myself. My name's George Jones. I'm a senior supply chain management consultant here at Bales Associates. I started out my time as a little bit of history on me. I was in the Marine Corps. I did that for about 10 years. I got out of the Marine Corps, went into college, and then started working at a hospital where I got pulled into Infor, which was awesome. So I started with our implementation through our did the trainings and everything with our end users, and then full circle ended up actually then working for Infor, and then coming here to Bales, where I'm at now, and I'm just absolutely loving it here. Great team we have here. And today, what we're going to be covering are vendor returns. So I've got a small agenda set up here for the vendor returns, and I'm going to go in and start with some of the some of the overview, some setup, different create options that we've got there. Do a demo of it, and then of that wizard, which is really nice. And then go into some of that financial impact, which I know is a big question that a lot of people ask. So we've got a couple different things set up to be able to go through and see how that financial impact. And then we'll go into some listen reports that we have, and then hopefully, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers at the end. So, hopefully we'll cover most of anything that you have. But if you do have more questions, we'll have that question and answer at the very end. We should be able to cover everything there. So I am going to stop my my camera. That way you don't see me moving my head all over the place. But just wave everybody and we'll get kicked off here. Any questions before I get started?
Nothing in the chat right now.
Okay. All right. Well, so what are vendor returns? As you can see here, vendor returns are transactions that you can use to document items that you're returning to the vendor. Um, you can create them different times. You can do it whenever you need to. You've got a product that needs to be returned, or if you've got overshipment messages turned on for the buyers to receive if you do over receipts. So if a buyer message comes in and it's rejected, you could create a vendor return at that point also. And then also if you're doing inspections, if you reject one of those inspections, you can go ahead and initiate a vendor return that way also. Now, what does that do? It's just you're requesting either replacement or compensation for that returned item. And the two roles that we could utilize to do this are, like it shows here, a buyer and a purchaser and receiver roles are two easy ways to go in and initiate out those vendor returns, the creation of those. So what are some of the benefits of vendor returns? Well, as you can see here, we've got that it's easy to use. You'll see when we go in and I do the demo on the wizard inside FSM, that wizard process brings you through creating that vendor return nice and easy. You just go through and it just leads you down the path, and it's just a wonderful way of creating a vendor return. Um, it also allows you to keep track of everything. So you've got your initial purchase order, you've got your receipt that you've done, invoices, chargebacks, everything. It all ties together. So utilizing that vendor return in the system allows you to be able to just track the entire movement of this item as it comes in, as it goes back, the invoicing, chargebacks, everything. It's a wonderful tie-in piece in there when you're working with your items. And then you've got some good listen reports that show some of your status. So I'm a big list guy. I love lists. So you've got that vendor return list that you can go in, and which will show also. But you've got that list that shows your vendor returns, and then you've got different reports that you can use to look at the status of these vendor returns. So there's a whole lot to vendor returns. It's not just creating that, but you can go in and really see the status of everything and see where you're going to get the benefit out of a vendor return. So in order for us to do vendor return, the first thing we'll want to do is set it up. And as you can see here, we've got going in into the match company area, and we'll show these steps and explain them in a little bit more detail. But stay from going into the match company, into the purchasing company, then setting up vendor returns in the purchasing vendor, and then return reason codes. So we'll go in there and explain all those in a little bit more detail. And I've got a touchy mouse, so I apologize for that. So vendor return setup, first thing is going in on that match company, going in and looking at the options and setting up to your vendor claims. So those values all sort of default in on your vendor returns. So you can go in to your match company, set whether you're going to be doing ship or hold goods. You can go in then and set up whether you're going to be doing chargebacks, credit memos, that credit memos where you're going to be waiting for that vendor to send a credit, or no charge. If the returns are going to automatically be replaced, you can set it up as a no charge. So just you could if those returns are just going to be automatically replaced, and then you can go down, specify whether you're going to replace returned goods. You could do that for the match company. You need to do that by the vendor. Then you go through and have the vendor claim write-off amount. Now that amount sort of determines on whether return to a vendor is justified or not. So whatever amount you have in that vendor claim write-off amount, if the amount of the return is less than that write-off amount, then you won't create that. So it's got to be greater. That vendor return would have to be greater than that write-off amount. So, and in this case, it's set to 0. So everything would be going through. And then we have the vendor claims chargeback hold code, where you would go through and specify a hold code, sorry, that would be for when you're holding that chargeback for whatever reason. So if you're doing chargebacks, you need to hold that chargeback for review. You could set that hold code, and then you would have that set up there. So we'd go through and put those options in at the match company level, get you prepped up in there, and then we'd move into the vendor return. So, well, I'm sorry, the purchasing company, and then going in the receiving and return section of and looking at the vendor return. We would go in here and specify whether we're going to require a reason code on the vendor return. So if we had some reason codes set up, so say we're doing reason codes and we had a vendor return damaged inventory or anything like that, we could attach reason codes to it, and we would force that here at the purchasing company. We could force that and require that at the purchasing company level. And then we would also set whether we want to return stock to inventory on cancel. Now, this is only for inventory items, but if you check this box, then what it's going to do is go through and do it's going to return that. If you cancel that return, it's going to return that stock to the inventory. And Yvonne, the version that we're talking about right now is FSM. So it's in the FSM version. And then we also have the last vendor return. So in this case, on this example, it's 73 was the last vendor return that was created. So then the next one that's done up will be a +1 to that. So it'll be 74. So. Then we've got our purchase order vendor, and then going in to the options area and selecting returns. Now, this is where we can go in and require RMAs from the vendor. So say that's a particular vendor requires RMAs, you could set that up. So say you don't require that an RMA is on everything, but certain particular vendors do, then you can go in and set that up. Or if it's the reverse, you just take that out. So then you can go in and also specify whether a document's required to go along with it. Now, it doesn't have to be just at the vendor level. It can also be as specific as down to the purchase from location. So if you have a vendor, like in this case, 3103, if they didn't require one at the vendor level, but say a certain particular purchase from location did, you could specify that if you're getting it from that particular purchase from location for the vendor, that a RMA is required. So you would have to put that RMA number in order for that vendor return to go through. And I'm sorry if I'm sniffing a lot. It's allergy season for me, so um, that was great until, of course, the call. So that's when the allergies have to kick in. And then our other, the next piece that we're going to set up is reason codes. Now, I've already sort of talked about reason code, or well, at least referred to a reason code. And you would go in and set up these reason codes for being able to use them in what vendor returns, uh, match discrepancy, contract holding. There's obviously you want to use like a naming convention. Otherwise, you start getting a bunch of vendor codes out there that are not vendor, sorry, reason codes out there that aren't really useful to you. So, like in here, we went and put VD, um, vendor damage, everything, all the vendor returns start with a V. So it's a vendor did not pass inspection, vendor department ordered wrong item. So different reason codes as to why this happened. So you'd want to come up with your naming convention on there, but you could go in and say why these items are being returned and be able to look at that um, in some different reports. Or when you're going through and looking through everything, see the different reason codes that you have out there. So now if we've gone through and done all our setup, the next thing that we would do is well, we'd start creating different vendor returns. So we've got different ways of going through creating a vendor return, and that is manually. You got two different ways of going in there manually. You've got the you can create manually from a purchase order using that wizard. You would do the purchase order, and then it's going to fill in a lot of that information. You've also got manually where a purchase order is not required. So you could go in and um, if you had one for like specials, or if you were trying to cover some other different piece and you weren't utilizing a purchase order for that, you could do it manually without a purchase order. And then you've also got from the inspection and a reject process, and then again from the receiver buyer's messages. So those the buyers would reject the over receipt and start a vendor return from that process also. So here's a little graphic on how this process sort of goes. So what you do, so sort of it's going to take us through just this little step, this little diagram here. So we're going to complete this vendor return name tab with a reason code, RMA number. And then once we do that, we're going to complete the authorization and enter some additional information. We're going to enter the amount detail in. We're going to authorize it. Then we're going to ship it. And then if we wanted to enter comments, we could enter comments in there, but that's completely optional. And then you could also print out the RMA. So as you can see, it goes through here. We've got that option of printing the RMA. If it's if you wanted to send that document with it, if you didn't have to, you don't have to. And then you ship your vendor return. Well, then everything stays the same until you get to this point, at which point you're going through and you've got either it's a credit memo or a chargeback. And I see I messed that up and I've got memo, but you've got credit memo or chargeback. So if it's chargeback, once you ship that vendor return, it's going to go and it's going to close that vendor return. And we'll show you the finance, what it does with the finance application with pieces here in a little bit. And then if you have a credit memo, you'll enter, it sort of stays out there waiting for vendor action until you get that credit memo. So once you enter that credit memo, then the vendor return closes. So what I'm going to do is switch over to the FSM environment. we're going to use our demo environment and go in and demo doing a vendor return from the vendor return wizard. So I'm going to go in here and I'm in FSM. And for this demo, I'm going to use the buyer role. I'll do that there. So I'm in FSM as a buyer, and I'm going to go to manage other processes, go to manage receiving, I'm going to go to vendor returns. So when I click in the vendor returns area, I come to my list. I'm going to maximize this list. I'm also going to make it a little bit bigger so it's a little bit easier for everyone to see. But this here, we're brought to this vendor returns list. Here's this list, and we'll go through and explain the list in a little bit more detail. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a vendor return. So I've got the option. I can go in here, create from purchase order. I can go in and do a create. I'm going to do a create from purchase order. So I'm going to go click in this create from purchase order, and I'm brought to this wizard where I can go through and start populating this vendor return. So I'm going to go in, sorry, and type in my company, or I could do a search for it, and then I'm going to go in and do my purchase order. Now, obviously, I would probably know my purchase order number that I have here, but I'm just going to go in and select my purchase order. If I knew it, I could go ahead and type it in. So once I click and populate that purchase order number, we'll see different, the vendor comes in, everything like that. I want to go in and select a reason code. We've gone through and I've specified different vendor things. So we've got different vendor returns. So I just did a search in there and I'm looking for my vendor codes, and we'll say that this is a damaged item. So I'm going to click my VDMG reason code, vendor return damaged item. It's set up here because of our match setup. I automatically do chargebacks. So I'm going to do my chargebacks. My replace goods is set up to use the default value, but I'm just going to say no, we're not replacing the goods. And then I am going to say that we're going to ship the goods. And then if I got my RMA, I'm going to put my RMA number in here. So it's my, well, go with a little bit just in case. So I've got my RMA number that I've gotten from the vendor inside of there, and I'm just going to click next. And as we can see, what that's going to do, that's going to, because of that, we're used to do a purchase order. I can't speak. Okay, sorry. It's pull in those purchase order lines. Well, in this case, there's one line, and it's item 10034. It's the vendor item there, and I can see what was the quantity that was received in there. So I've got that piece that's received, and then on the side of that, I can see that there is an area for me to put down what the returned quantity is. If I hover over there, even though it's not visible because I've got it maximized out, I've got a big monitor, so I can hover over it and see what those what the comments are that are hidden out there. So it's my return quantity. Say I'm going to return 2 of these. So I'm going to put 2 in there, and I can look down here and see quantities already being returned, quantities shipped. So we can see there's already been a bunch of different things done to this one. And I'm going to go in and click next. And I can see here that this row has pending changes. That's what that means, is there's pending changes in there. So I'm going to hit next. And then it's going to bring me to this end piece here. Now I can go ahead and click authorize from this here if I want to, or I can go straight into the vendor return and look at it from there. So if I know it's authorized and ready to go, I can click authorize here, or I can do it by clicking into the vendor return. So I'm just going to click. I've already done a lot of on this. So if you go in and you try to receive, you try to return more than you have to receive, you're going to get an error message out there that's not going to allow you to do that. So I clicked authorize, and that authorize went through. And now I'm going to go look at my vendor return. Notice my hyperlink here. So I can click on this vendor return and see my vendor return. So I'm taken straight to this vendor return. I can come in and take a look at this vendor return and make sure everything looks right. So I can go in, just double check everything. It's already authorized. It's by the vendor. It's ready to go. All I need to do now is ship it out. So if everything's good, I've gotten all my I've gotten everything back. So I can go in and do that vendor return and ship that out. So once I get that shipment together, I can do my ship, but my quantity's out of balance. So I can go in and take care of that side of here. Shouldn't have been out of balance, but let me grab a second. Yeah. So what I need to do now is I need to go in and fix this balance issue here. And I'm going to be sending out everybody instructions on how to do that. Yes, someone's got a question.
There are no questions in the
Oh, okay.
chat, George. I think perhaps someone was just off mute. But if you
Okay.
guys do have any questions, please put them in the chat.
Okay.
I'm monitoring.
So I'm going to open this line up here. And I'm going to come in here, get the detail, and then return details, return. There we go. Set up my VIN number here. So now I've got my vendor return there. Ship it. Yeah. I've been playing, this one's been played in, so I'm going to go with a different one in order to, I've had to do a lot more to that one. I've went in and received that one numerous times, so I apologize for that. I'm going to go in and grab this one here, and I'm going to go in and do some more. That would have to do a lot more to that one than I want to spend time in. So I'm going to go in here and ship, and then I'm going to use no on the replace goods. And we can see how easily, yeah, this one's not any shipped. We can see how quickly you can build these vendor returns. And got my one in there. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to go click authorized. And do you see if I don't put in my RMA number, because if we've set it to go in and require an RMA number, then it's going to cause me to go in and have to put in my RMA number. So I won't be able to go in and finish that out. So now if I go in here and click authorize, it'll go through and be authorized. I can go into my vendor return. And I've got all my information inside of here. And then if I click ship, what that's going to do is we've got it together. The warehouse clerks have pulled everything together, and we're actually we're going to be shipping that out. I'm going to click on ship, and then that will change the status of that to close. And that's because I've set it up as a it shifts to a closed status because we've got it set up as a chargeback. So instead of waiting for credit memo, it automatically kicks out and goes straight into the closed status because the accounting piece is already taken care of. So I'm going to come in here. We'll talk about the different statuses on there. Yes, I will do that too. I will go through. I've got that way over on the other side, so I'm missing them questions. So I apologize for that.
Oh, George, I've got you. I'll yell out when we need you.
Okay. Yeah.
At the end, we have something for you to do.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I was looking over and I was like, oh, I already had one brain aneurysm there for a second. I couldn't remember something, so I had to look. But anyway, so vendor return statuses. So the different statuses that we have. When you first saw it, we go in and we add that in. It gets that added status. And then when you saw before it was shipped, once we click that authorized action, we had that authorized by vendor piece in there. So before we shipped it, it was authorized by the vendor. So it was authorized to go through. We're just waiting to grab it all together to ship it out. So it's just in that area there. Now, if we go and we're using like a credit memo, or we're doing like receipt of a replacement. So, but if we're either one of those things happen, then what it would do instead of going to the close status, it would become waiting for vendor action. So what that would be is you go in, and we also look at how the ship to is. Yes, I will do that also. We'll go in and I'll crank out a bunch of, we'll go in, and when I go in and look at that receiver piece in there, we can go in and do that also. So that closed, when it's waiting for vendor action, it's either waiting on that credit memo or then the receipt of a replacement for that purchase order item. And then you could go in and do a closed status. So you can go in and the chargeback has gone through, or you closed it manually, or the credit memo's gone through. So then it becomes a closed vendor return. So some of the differences between credit memo and chargeback, this is, I think, a big piece that everybody sort of has a question on, is you've got your credit memo and you've got the chargeback. So the credit memo is going to be applied in the vendor return in accounts payable. So when it comes in, it's going to be applied to it later. So that's why it's in vendor, it's waiting vendor action because it's waiting for that credit memo to go in. Now, the chargeback is system generated credit memo, and it reduces the amount automatically. So it reduces it from the vendor and then states the reason for the reduction. And that's the reason why it closes that vendor return off right off the bat. So the credit memo, you're waiting for that return to come to you, that credit memo to come to you from the vendor, and the chargeback, it's automatically being created. So what's the differences inside of that? So, okay, what's the postings? What's it going to be like? Where's it going to hit? What's it going to do? What's it going to update between a credit memo and a chargeback? So for the vendor return on a credit memo for inventory, I want to go through what happens on a credit memo for an inventory, what happens for a credit memo on a non-inventory item, and then also a chargeback for the inventory and a chargeback for a non-inventory item. So we can see here that we've got our ship vendor return. So when we ship the vendor return, what it's going to do, this is for a credit memo for inventory, it's going to debit the return suspense account for the inventory location, and then it's going to credit the inventory account. And that's going to update stock on hand. It's going to reduce it. It's going to reduce the detail to stock on hand, that item detail piece, where it's at specifically in the bins and the things. And then the vendor return is going to be waiting for vendor action. So that's what happens when we ship it and we're waiting for vendor actions. It's doing those pieces there. Now, when that credit memo is processed against the vendor return, so AP gets that credit memo in and they process that, it's going to debit the AP accrual count, and then it's going to credit the return suspense account. And then it's going to update, the update it does is it's going to update the vendor return. If the full amount's credited, then it's going to close the vendor return. So if the full credit memo, if a credit memo comes in for the full amount, then it's going to close the return. If you go in, say that credit memo is put in, say the credit memo is then canceled, what it's going to do is it's going to debit the return suspense account, putting that information back in there, and then it's going to credit the AP accrual account. And then it's going to change that return, that status of that vendor return back to waiting for vendor action. So that's going to change on that vendor status. Then if we go in, say you cancel that vendor return, or if you close that vendor return, and the difference between those we've got in here, and I think this is a great way of stating it. You would use cancel when the credit memo's not been processed against the return. And then you would close when a partial credit has been processed, but no additional amount's going to be. So that's when you would maybe do a cancel, or you would do the close, depending on whether there's a partial credit's been processed or not, or whether anything's been put against it. But if you're canceling it, what's going to happen is you're going to have the scrap account is going to get debited for the inventory location if you do not have that return to stock on inventory on cancel checked. If you've got that checked, what's going to happen is the inventory account's going to be, and then that return suspense account is going to be credited. So that's where that checkbox for that return stock on inventory on cancel really comes into play. Is if you're canceling or closing that vendor return, it's going to debit the inventory account. Whereas if you don't have that, it's going to debit the scrap account. So that's the difference in that check flag there. And then, of course, closing the vendor returns the same way. It's still posting in the same area. Both of those are going to close the vendor returns. And then that cancel is going to update the return cancel quantity. So that's what's going to happen with a credit memo for inventory. Now, on a non-inventory, what it's going to do, because it's not inventory, it's when you ship the vendor return, there's going to be no postings for debit or credit. And then you're going to be doing, it will still go into the waiting for vendor action area. When you get the credit memo, that's going to behave where you get the AP accrual count. and then it's going to go for the vendor return account, which is defaulted from that PO line, and it's going to update that vendor return. So if the full amount's credited, it's going to close out the vendor return, and you're good to go. And if you cancel that credit memo that you put in, it's going to debit back the return accounts and then credit back the AP accrual accounts. And then again, it's going to change the status. Again, cancel, return, and close, utilizing if whether partial credit's been processed or is not. Whereas if it's since it's a non-inventory item, so it's either created from, even if it's a special or a non-stock, no postings are done debit or credit wise, but it is going to update and close that vendor return and also cancel quantities. There we go. Sorry. So now we'll go in, look at chargeback for inventory. So we saw on credit memo for inventory what it does. Now with chargeback on inventory, it's going to debit the return suspense account, and it's going to credit the inventory account, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to update it's going to do the updates, which is the same. It's going to reduce that stock on hand, reduce the detail. It's going to put it in a closed status though. That's the one difference in there. And that's because it's going down and it's creating that chargeback. So when that chargeback is created, it's taking that AP accrual count and debiting that, and then it's crediting the return suspense account. So it's automatically doing that. And then if that chargeback is then canceled, it'll do just that reverse. It'll debit the return suspense account and then credit that AP accrual account. And then it'll change that the return status back. It'll change it to a waiting for vendor action status if you cancel that chargeback. So you can go in and cancel that chargeback. So on a non-inventory way, it's the same thing here where there's no postings, debit or credit wise, when you do the ship for vendor return, but it does still go into a closed status because when the chargeback is created, the AP accrual count is debited and the vendor returns count, which is the default from the PO line, is credited. So then it updates the vendor return, and then the same thing when you cancel that chargeback, you go in and that's going to debit the vendor return accounts and credit the AP accrual account. So I know there's always a lot of questions on the postings and what everything looks like when it goes between credit memo and chargeback. So hopefully that's very helpful for everybody to sort of see how that's working. So so some of the financial impact on the vendor returns. So if the right process isn't in place, you're going to be your returns may not close properly. Your credit memos might not be applied to close out the vendor returns. So you might have some hanging. You might get credit memos in and not have vendor returns getting closed out. You could have a significant dollar amount not received due to vendor inaction or misapplication of credit memos. So you want to make sure that when you're going through and doing your setup and making sure that you've got your process down, that you've got the right process, because it's very important. You don't want to have it to where you've got a lot of hanging things out. You want to make sure that everything's sort of moving properly. So a couple different reports that you can go into and look at inside on when it comes to like going in and doing your vendor returns. I'm going to switch into the system here. Switch the wrong. There we go. So I'm going to go back into here and the printing of the vendor RMA. So if you needed to print out your vendor RMA, I'm here under the buyer role, and I'm going to go in and under listen processes, create purchasing processes, print vendor RMA. I could go in, fill out this information. So I could fill out my company. I come in, do my return from location. Or I could go in and just pick my return number. I usually would just go in my company, pick my return number. I go in here, I can pick my return number and then click submit. So when that goes through, and I've sort of cheated a little bit, I've already got some that printed out. So it's not going to be the exact same. But what that would do is that's going to create this vendor, this RMA. So it's going to give you this printout of this RMA document that you could attach inside of there. So you've got all this, the information on the lines, credit chart, if there was any charges or credits or anything like that that need to be in there. Maybe there's a handling charge, but it shows you all the different pieces of that, of the information on that RMA. And then another one that I sort of reference here in the vendor reports are the purchasing return status reports. Now inside of that, I would go into the purchasing lists inside there, inside the buyer role, and I would go to this purchasing return status report. So if I click and I go into that report, I could run that by company. And then I could put down when my returns were created. I could put a certain date range inside of there and pick a range of dates that I wanted to look at. I could also look at different vendors. I could look at different statuses. I can see different pieces on that, but I want to see all my statuses. So I'm going to submit that. Well, what this report would then return would be the purchasing and with the purchasing return status report. So what this would do is it's going to go through and show you all the different purchasing returns. Now, if you went in, I said all. If you went in and said I only wanted to see those that are in the open stat, that are waiting for vendor action or anything like that, I put closed. So I'm seeing all of them, but I can go through and see all my different returns with the different statuses that are inside of there. Like this one here is waiting for vendor action. So say if maybe I said I only want to see those that are waiting for vendor action, so I could see that, I would get this report with just those statuses. And then also inside of there, I've got the vendor returns listing here. So I can come in and look at this vendor return list and see everything in this list. And with any list, you can go in and personalize it. So if there's a column that doesn't exist that you really need to truly see in there, you could do a personalization on those and get that information in there. But you can also then go in and view all your different statuses through your vendor returns. So say you wanted to only see your waiting for vendor actions, you could use your list and do a search for that way. So that's just a little bit on that list. There is also a purchasing returns analysis report that you could run. So if you run this purchasing returns analysis report, you could go in and run that by company also. And I didn't put that one down in there. I probably should have. And I can come in and specify by reason codes what it is. So if I wanted to see all my returned damage, I could run that by select by reason code, and then I could come in here, only items with returns, and submit that. And then when that report was to run, I would see different analysis based off of my reason codes, and this was one I ran off everything. So we would be able to see all the different per reason code what your amount was. So you could see, you know, by def reason code, you could see the different pieces on that. So I know I had a question on what it looks like from the receiver role. So I want to go kick off into that real quick. So,
And
sorry, Geri,
George, time check, you have 8 minutes left.
8 minutes. All right.
Yeah, well, a little
Good.
less than that because we want to bring Tom back real quick at the end.
Yes. So purchasing receiver, we could go in and look at it from the purchasing receiver role, and then go into we've got purchasing receiver, go in and do vendor return right there. You'll notice that you're brought into the same listing. Even though you're going in as a purchasing receiver, you're still brought into this vendor return list. So you don't lose that. And you still have your create and your create from purchase order. So you can still go in and create from purchase order with that wizard inside of the purchasing receiver using that vendor return. If you went in from the create area, you would go in, and this is your vendor return, which is still easy to create. It just doesn't go through that wizard of going through and doing the purchase order. So I know someone had a question about doing a consignment item where you could go in and you could create a vendor return that wasn't from a purchase order. And I'm just going to go grab one real quick, and I'm just going to make this very quick and a fast one here. Sorry. So I'm going to go create one from OR stores. I'm just going to say this is a vendor return damaged item. And then I'm going to hit save on that. So I'm going to go click in authorize. So I've got that there. I'm going to put in my RMA number. And I want to click on save. I save a lot. And then I can go in here. I can click on that ship to. I could set that drop ship area if I want, if it's a drop ship, but we're not doing the drop ship. But I'm going to go in here on lines, and I'm going to put that it's a special, and I'm going to say it's a quantity of 2, and I'm going to do a vendor item number of 354 P. So I'm going to put that as my special item. So that's my consignment item here. And we'll just say I know it's a mesh. So by the each, and they're $25 per. And I can come in here and save that. So I've got all that information saved. I then go in, set up my distributions. So I know it's company 100. I know my accounting unit is OR. I could come in. I'm just going to set that. And then I have a consignment account that I'm using, an inventory consignment account. I'm going to hit save. I'll click my back arrow. And then I've got that vendor return line set up. And then I can go ahead and authorize that out. So then it's authorized, waiting for vendor. Then I can do that shipment on that. And so that's going in from the purchasing receiver, doing a vendor return inside of without using a wizard on a special item. So that's going to be consistent with either special items or anything like that. If it's not got a purchase order attached to it, you can still do returns. And if we needed to attach a document to this, I don't know, this one's closed, but we can go in, click on create, and then in that comment area for it, I can put in a name for it. And I can say that it's, we'll say print on return documents. So I can sit there and that in there, put a comment on there. Save that. So I can put my comments in there. That cover tried to look and see and try to cover the questions as fast as I could, but did I miss
No
anything,
worries.
Geri?
Yeah, there's actually one open question I did not know the answer to, and we realize we are coming up on time. If any of you can stay a little longer, we'll stay with you, and George can answer any additional questions that you may have. But the one question that came up that I don't know the answer to had to do with, does the status of the PO or PO line matter for creating a return? And I wasn't certain. I do know that if you create it from a PO, the line has to be received. So
Yes.
but it can be closed, it can be open, but I wasn't sure about the header. So I have that on our to follow up list just in case.
Yes, I
That's a
don't.
great question, Catherine.
That is yes. Yeah, that is a great question because I don't know it off the top of my head, and I don't like to throw guesses out.
Yeah.
But thank you.
And then
I'm thinking it would still go, but
I
I'm
think
not
the
for
other
sure.
I do too. So we'll take that as an open item and we'll get that hopefully sent out ASAP as to if there are any restrictions on that. Okay, the other ones, we can look through the chat, George. I think I got them all. Other than that, if I did not, please let me know, but I know there is a new one here, and it says if receiving creates a return, does this create a queue to work for the purchasing folks? And it does not create a queue, but they also have access to the returns process. So it's really how you work your business processes. That would be my answer. George, anything that you have seen differently or would like to add?
No, that's exactly what I would say too.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right on the money there, Geri. Thank you.
You can tell we've worked together, right, George?
Yes.
All right. So do you want to go back to your PowerPoint? And I think you can turn it over to Tom at the end, but we can also stay for questions if people would like have any, if we
Yes.
haven't. So I know there's some important things coming up too.
Okay, hey, great job, guys, George and Geri, and a lot of great questions from the crowd. So a couple of housekeeping items before I let everybody go and enjoy the rest of their Friday. First off, Molly Velasco will be sending out the recording link to all the registrants. And if you didn't register and happen to join us today, you can email Molly at molly.velasco@balesllc.com, and she'll certainly send you the link to the recording. Some other items, some upcoming sessions next Friday. We're going to be doing another informative Friday session, Infor HR Talent Management, Talent Introduction to Custom Groups. And on Friday the 28th, we've got a differences between Infor, Microsoft add-ins, and Spreadsheet Designer on the 28th. So if you're interested, please join us. Lastly, George, maybe you want to flip the slide if you don't mind. We've got another offering that we'd like to make sure everybody takes advantage of and is aware, and that is our Coffee with Consultants. If you have any questions about today's webinar and the information we provided, or you have any other questions, please go to our website and we'll be happy to spend some time with you, up to 30 minutes, complimentary half-hour sessions with one of our consultants, and get all your questions answered. So with that said, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I think our next, after October, our next Informative Friday sessions will be in February. So if you want to put a tickler in your calendar and join us, we'd appreciate that. So thanks again, everybody who joined us. And thanks again to George and Geri for a great presentation. And everybody have a fantastic weekend. Take care.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Geri.
Tom and Geri, yes.
Oh,
So if any, I couldn't resist, George.
Tom, oh gosh, I just got that.
Yeah.
I was not smart enough to just throw that out there on purpose. That was by pure
I was a little slow on that one.
accident.
So if anybody does have any other questions, please feel free to ask away. Or if you don't, again, when you get the documentation, take it for a test drive and then reach out. As Tom mentioned, we do have coffee with consultants, except with some of us, it's Diet Coke instead of coffee.
And it's nice seeing some names that I know out there. So, hello, everybody.
Hello,
How you doing, Jill?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing great.
It's good to hear your voice and your laugh. I missed it.
Oh, well, good. The same here.
Yep.
I saw Catherine out there and Lisa too. So
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any more questions coming through, so I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks everybody for joining us.
yeah, thank you, everybody. If there's questions, just go ahead.